Drainage, specifically drainage around the property, is got to be one of the more important elements of an exterior inspection, and it also influences the interior inspection. You don't have to be a hydrologist or an engineer to understand water is a common denominator in just about everything that goes wrong in a building. Leaky pipes, leaky roofs, leaky basements, and poor drainage. And so it's very important that you identify all of those conditions. Those very important items that are listed within the CommSOP that we should look at in every inspection include the vegetation, the retaining walls, stormwater drainage, and general topography. If you're keeping those in mind, you should be able to follow the drainage plan of this building. So let's take a look at some of the items in this property that are going to affect what we're going to need to look at. It's important when you're doing the drainage inspection of any property or the general grading of any property, you create a plan. My plan is to encircle this property. I'm going to look for all of those items that affect the drainage, the slope of the property, the catch basins, the stormwater retention, any drainage features we might have, and that includes roof drainage. The roof of the building collects a lot of water, and that water needs to be contained. So let's just go walk around this property and let's see what our drainage looks like. And that will begin with just looking at our general topography. This particular building has about a 6 or 8 foot slope, and that slope starts at the beginning of the property, but our consequence is this slope heads directly towards the building. And so any water that falls on this property is going to be heading straight down towards the building at all times. And so we need to watch and see how any water affects the building from the parking lot. A parking lot doesn't drain. There's no way asphalt is going to suck in water. That water is going down all the way to the building. And I've always made a remark on any report I've done that talks about the drainage plan. And if the building falls in the middle of the drainage plan, you know, there's that old adage, if you want to keep water out of your basement, build it on the top of a mountain. If you want to have water in your basement, build in the middle of the valley. This building is in the middle of a valley. So we need to watch to see how any water moves around. I think we need to take a closer look at that. Let's see how the drainage looks on this building. There's really no set way to look at drainage. If you were an engineer, you'd come out here with a transit or a level and do a topography inspection of this entire property. If you're newer and not as and hasn't seen as much of this as maybe somebody with a lot of years of experience, you might decide you want to actually make a really quick sketch of the property with some arrows to help you pinpoint what you see the drainage is. Again, this property is pretty special with the amount of drainage that we have, but you want to follow the water. No matter what you do on any property, you want to follow the water. One of the tricks that I learned years ago is just taking a simple golf ball. And I just take a golf ball, and the golf ball is going to mimic the water. There's nothing in fact, the CommSOP says we don't do flood testing on properties. Well, heck, I'm not going to bring out a garden hose and put it on here, but I'm going to simply put a golf ball down on the parking lot, and I'm going to follow where that goes, and let's see where we can ultimately figure out where this golf ball lies. The old golf ball trick. Now again, I like golf balls because the dimples actually stop a ball. They're not like a tennis ball that they'll keep bouncing down the road. I like to use a golf ball, and it'll help me with watching the drainage. I'm going to take a golf ball, and I'm just going to drop it right here in the parking lot, and I'm just going to figure out where that water's heading. This water is going down quite vigorously. It hits the curb. Wait, that water went over the curb. If this water is brisk enough, if we're having a heavy enough rain, that water may have a tendency to slosh over this sidewalk. That's a concern for me. We're also inspecting in beautiful Colorado. course, though, today is not the middle of winter. Winter was yesterday. But in Colorado, we have the same climate that you might have in the Midwest, the Northeast, the Northwest. We get frost, we get freezing. So if I'm following my water and the snow and the rain or whatever comes down on our asphalt, in this particular case, that water will melt on the asphalt, or the snow will melt on the asphalt, and who's to say it doesn't pool or pond right here? And that pooling or ponding in the middle of this accessibility area may be a potential issue for somebody trying to visit this building in the wintertime. So think outside the box as you're watching your drainage. Is there an area that's going to pool or pond the water? Is there an area that's not going to drain as well? Is there an area that's just not drainable? Check that out as you're doing your walk around the building. Let's continue our walk. I think there's some more interesting things that we're going to find on this building. Continuing our drainage discussion, you have to look, and we've said this in other videos, we've said this in other writings that you might have seen, in this macro view of this property. And one of the things I really want to touch on is if you look over my shoulder on this side, we've got a property that's considerably higher than this one. And so you got to concern yourself with, what about their drainage? Is their drainage going to affect this building? And so when you look at their building nicely discharges their water from their parking lot into this grass field, into this grass area that's behind me. Now, you got to go to yourself, should I be looking at that as well? How far wide of gaze do I need to take on a building? I think you're going to determine that as you're at your building. But when we look at this property, I've got a very nice curb here that separates that grass area from any water influencing us. But again, I've got this monster bit of topography flowing this way. And as it flows from the high end of this parking lot to the low end of this parking lot towards the building, we have to design something that's going to protect the building from this drainage. And that is this water cycling this way. It again will hit the curb. And as it hits the curb, it goes into this concrete trough. And I think that concrete trough has to be the next spot that we investigate to watch our drainage around this property. So as the water drains down this parking lot with such fervor, it's going to slap against these curbs. Now the curbs are designed so that they're sloping towards this cut area. Now on this cut area, they didn't want to have a wide open spot. They didn't want to put an inversion in here where they have a catch basin. They just made it so they have a steel plate bridging across this trough. So think about all those things that might go wrong with this, which includes trip hazards as well. So we have a very broad picture to think about, not just drainage, but then that accessibility thing that could be with trip hazards or dangers. But I want to focus on, as the water comes this way, goes under this trough, or this steel plate through this trough, it's going to go around the building. So that's why we're going to compartmentalize, and that's why we're going to take segments of this drainage inspection and try to follow ultimately where this water goes, because we want to make sure it's going to some place that's contained, and I'm interested to know where that's heading. I will tell you one thing, when it comes to commercial inspections, you're going to get your steps in. And when you do a commercial inspection, you need to walk the entire property. So here we are on this side of the property. Now I don't go into north, south, east, west, right, left, forward, backwards. You can talk about it however you'd like. If you've got a compass, declinate things. We are on the side of the building. Many times I talk about the building as if I'm facing it. I'm on the left side of the building. So I've got this trough that sluices this water across the entire left side of the building. I think for documentation purposes, an inspector should take pictures of at least every side of the building to illustrate how the drainage is, even if this drainage is satisfactory. but that's up to you and how you write your reports. But for me, I would take a picture that shows this entire side. Now, when you're looking at this, look for the drainage. Is the water able to migrate over this? Have we created a berm? Have we created something that's going to stop the water? It does not appear to be. This looks very satisfactory, but I want to watch this drainage continue. I wonder where it's going next. Let's go find out. Following the drainage across this left side shows again this concrete trough. We're also bringing down the roof drainage for the first time into the trough. But then this water ultimately comes down to this large basin area. What the heck is this? Well, in construction or in any type of engineering terms, we have two types of basins. We have retention and detention. Detention is temporary and retention is always there. So if you look at a building and there's always a pond in front of it, that's retention. That's holding the water permanently in place, like a lake. Detention is just the opposite. This area, water would come into here and then have to evacuate out after some form of period of time. I don't know what that time is. You don't know what that time is. But the idea is we're controlling our water. Now, it's very important as you access areas like this that you are safe. That you are safe. You need to make sure that if you go into someplace, you can get out of someplace, that you're not going to go into someplace that's a trip hazard for you, a danger hazard for you. It is your inspection ultimately. So you could inspect this by walking around it. You could inspect this by walking in it. Today we're dry. And so today I think we can walk a great distance through this. But if this was a wetter time, I'm not going to walk through water. I'm not going to walk through mud. Those are areas that I can become endangered in and or hurt myself. So that's very important to think about as you're doing your inspection. But let's take a look a little deeper into this. As we're doing so, think of those items in the COMSOP. A commercial property inspection has the 13 items of the COMSOP that encompass it, and so many of those are looked at simultaneously between the roof drainage, the retaining wall, the normal drainage, and the exterior of this building. Again, we're focusing on drainage right now. Let's go on down into this area and let's take a look and see what we have. So we're in this drainage basin, and it's important to identify some of those basic construction principles that are so common in any other system that we're inspecting. Those include plumb, level, square, straight. So I'm going to look at the retaining walls on each side that are holding this back. Are they straight? Are they plumb? Are the tops level? Is it functioning as it is intended? Then I start to think about, then what are my breaches? What are my elements coming in? I've got this here, which is the roof drain. Is the roof drain coming down damaging this concrete? No. Is a little erosion, but certainly nothing that's catastrophic or impinging upon, or impeding upon, I should say, its structural stability. Then I look at the bottom, because I've got all this mass of earth and I've got this massive concrete supporting this earth, we need to have something that's going to prevent hydraulic pressures from causing structural problems. Those are our weep holes. So down at the bottom of this wall, every few feet, I have a weep hole. And that weep hole allows any water or any hydraulic pressure that's behind this wall to evacuate out. And so it's important to note those, because on a concrete wall like this, that is, I guess the term we better use would be monolithic, all one piece, versus segmented like blocks, that water needs to be able to come out. And so we want to watch for that. Then beyond that, I'm just going to walk this basin and I want to try to see where this water ultimately goes. So let's go see if we can find that. So cracks. When you look at a large mass of concrete like this, we look at our cracks. And it's interesting with cracks, because cracks will tell you just about everything that you want to know about them. So when I see a beautiful crack like this, one of the first things I think about is, how does it look? This crack is even on the top as it is on the bottom. So I don't have any element or visual cue of a movement. If it was wider at the top than it is at the bottom, or wider at the bottom than it is at the top, that would signify movement. So if this crack was wider here than it was down there, then I would think this wall is tilting. Then I would also want to make sure, again, I talked about plumb level, square, and straight. I would want to make sure that looking down this wall, this isn't an area of bulge, because an even crack like this could be a pressure outward that's showing on this wall. But in this particular case, what I particularly like, and if I have a client with me and they're asking me questions, I would show them the fact that this crack isn't even consistent. This crack stops here, goes to here, moves over, goes to here. This is a crack that we would describe as shrinkage. It's a typical crack. It's a crack that happens during the curing process of this concrete. Now, what's also interesting with this concrete is you can really kind of put yourself into the mode of, or the Wayback Machine from the cartoons of, how was this basin constructed? Well, this basin was constructed, as it appears to me, that this was put in first, the floor. And this wall was put in afterwards because of the way this crack is down at the bottom. It appears that this wall sits on top of this floor. So having some damage or some minor cracking or some concrete irregularities is not unusual. If you think of when we removed the forms that it took to put this concrete in, and you took those off, you're going to leave a little bit of remnants or a little bit of damage, and that's what we're looking at. Our clients aren't concerned with the minutia. They're concerned with what affects their building and what's going to affect ultimately their budget or their wallets. And so to look at this wall, as I've looked at this entire wall, I would call it very typical. I would call it normal. I would call any cracking typical or normal. My report would indicate that. Normal cracking present on the retaining wall, at the basin, period. And there's nothing really else to highlight on it. But we still need to look at how we de-watered this basin. I wonder how they're doing that. We're down here in the basin still, and I'm trying to figure out where this water evacuates to. And then I'm looking around and I see that we have 3 holes in the bottom of this. They're not very big holes, they're a 4-inch hole, but that's enough. And the idea of this is the water from the parking lot, the water from the roof, basically the water from the entire footprint of this property ends up in here. Some engineer, not us, calculated how many units of water will take to fill this basin. And then they also calculated that if I put 3 holes in this, how fast it will de-water, because the idea is if I was to throw all of this water directly into the storm water control for this municipality, I'm going to overflow their capacity. Maybe that's what's all of a sudden going to run off to the lake or run off to a river, and we don't want that. And so we want to hold it here so that everything can kind of breathe and accumulate. And so my comment on these 3 holes that we have is they're without grates. And so if I have any debris that clogs these, this would certainly influence how fast this drains. And at the end of the day, if I've got standing water in an area that's not designed for standing water, that's a haven for mosquitoes or any other inhabitant that might be a nuisance. And so think about that. So when I'm looking at these, I'm going to note the fact I've got these 3 drains. They're without grates or covers. But there's one more interesting thing right over here on my shoulder. I think we need to get a little closer look at. Let's go see what that is. I figured it out. Took me a minute. We're talking about drainage. All of a sudden, I started thinking about a toilet and how a toilet flushes and how a toilet fills. This is a maximum capacity overflow. Just like in a toilet where you got the little fill tube down the middle of a toilet tank, and if too much water goes into the tank, it overflows. That's what this is. So when this basin fills with water, an engineer has designed it that this is the maximum amount of water that it will hold, and then any extra water will go over this, through this, and go directly into the storm sewer. That's awesome. What a neat design, but that's what that is. Beyond this overflow, then you got to think about all this debris down here. If we were in a day that wasn't as hot as it is or as dry as it is, this would probably be mud. And this would be an area I'm not going to walk. But today, because we're nice and dry, I'm in here. But I am absolutely going to place on my report some photos of all of this debris, because any of this debris is going to cause some form of issue to the drainage down here. And this would be part of the maintenance. That would also transfer over to any conversation we're having with landscaping, because again, this is how we're keeping up with that portion of the building. But nonetheless, I'm going to look the same principles we've looked at in every other system: plumb, level, square, straight. Does it look like it's functioning? It absolutely does. And is it going to help the building? Certainly. So let's take a look at a little bit more drainage, and that's going to be passing up as we go out of this basin up towards the building. I have found through years of doing inspections, and I'm not saying that to hurt my arm patting, but patting myself on the back, but I'm just going to say every inspection you perform is a learning experience. And one of the earliest learning experiences I ever had is to never say thumbs up or everything's great until you've made your complete lap around the entire system. When I come over here, I don't have as perfect a concrete. I have a crack, and this crack goes up and down, but again, it's not gaped and it's not spreading. So I think it is a little bit of a thermal crack. But what we have down here is a condition that is described as honeycombing. Honeycombing is when the concrete did not either get agitated or mixed enough, or it just separated. And so we don't have this beautiful slurry of smooth cement and sand. We have rough, exposed stone. So is it a problem? Well, it depends. It depends on how much of the wall in percentage it is, and I don't know what that answer is, but if you think it's too much, it's probably too much, and how deep it is. Let me talk about depth. If I've got a 12-inch wide wall, and I've got a half-inch wide stone, and I'm only 1 stone deep, it's probably not an issue. I've degraded that wall in this square foot area by 1/2 of an inch in that little bit of spot. Probably not going to amass into a structural failure. But if I'm 2 or 3 stones deep, I've taken a considerable percentage of the depth of that wall away from that wall. So that's what I'm going to look for. So at the end of the inspection, I'm going to take a picture of this, I'm going to show my client, and I'm going to say honeycombing is present on the rear wall. Should you want to add those second qualifiers, which so many people like to do, continue to monitor for change. Would be an awesome way to say it. Otherwise, I just say honeycombing is present on the bottom of the exterior wall, and then I usually just put a period on it, and then I think the rest of the wall looks very satisfactory. But I think we do need to continue our drainage back up this hill and around this right side of the building. We know all concrete cracks. That's what it's designed to do. It gets hard, it cracks. But there's elements, when you look at this, where we've had such excessive spalling. And spalling is where the face falls off of something. And that smooth face that was once here is now gone. I take a look at a situation like this and try to decide, is this limiting its ability to function as intended? Or is this dangerous to the public? And then lastly, is this going to be something that is going to be an eyesore to the building that somebody that wants to patron this building would not come otherwise? Well, frankly, it's solid. And so it's not degraded to the point it's not doing what it's supposed to do. That water can still trough down into this basin. Really, no patrons are ever going to come in this area. So lastly, I think it's just usually just an aesthetic issue. And so I would just take a note of it. I take a picture of it. I talk about how this trough area over here has this surface spalled. It can be rejuvenated, but it might not be necessary given where it's at. But it's certainly something you want to make sure you're dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and giving your clients that information. So I would just let them know that we've got some spalling here at this trough area. I'm of the old school of tell your clients what you're going to go do it, then tell them what you just did. So I really like to summarize every segment of the inspection, especially what if they weren't participatory and didn't walk with you through the whole drainage of the property. Maybe they were inside the building. Maybe you did this before they came here. But nonetheless, I think it's important to summarize what we saw. And today, we see a property with tremendous drainage. The drainage starts at the property line and drains to this building. As it drains to this building, I think they've done a good job deflecting it around the building. So they've made the building the high point in the middle of the valley and allowed these two troughs, the one that goes this way and the one that goes this way, go back to that drainage area in the rear of the property. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of the small defects. Those include the debris, the open grates in the drainage area, as well as that little spalling that's in that trough that we had. I let them determine what's important to them. I'm not the authority. I'm not telling them that they have to do anything, but it's our job as professional commercial property inspectors. Follow the CompSop, stay within your lane, and let them make all their decisions intelligently. So drainage has to be part of every commercial property inspection.